All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and this is episode 16. So we're glad that you're still sticking around, and hopefully you're learning some great information, and hopefully you're applying it to your congregations and your organizations. So I definitely want to do a recap of last week because my staff reminded me that I was very passionate about delegation, and over the weekend I realized that delegation is such an intricate part of good leadership that it probably should be addressed once again for those that may not have seen episode 15 where I talked about delegation. So what is delegation? In a nutshell, delegation is sharing responsibility with individuals who are your subordinates or on your leadership team. In other words, for people who are pastors, you have assistant pastors, you have executive pastors. They should not just be titles. They should actually hold job responsibilities. We see this all the time in what we would deem the natural world. When you're on a job and you get started and they give you a job description and that's the expectation of your job. So it is natural, so it is spiritual. In the nonprofit arena or in the church arena, it should be the same thing. If you have an executive pastor, there should be a job description and there should be job duties that have been ascribed to that individual. And let's say you have an executive pastor and their job is to make sure that all the executive duties are taken care of, meaning the money's counted appropriately, the money's accounted for appropriately, that offerings are taken up at a certain time. There should be a specific job tasks that are given to these individuals, in essence, to prepare them for your departure. Especially for those of you that have aspirations of being apostles and bishops, it is imperative that you delegate responsibilities to pastors or assistant pastors so that when your pastor has to leave or when they are upgraded or when they are promoted, yes, promotion takes place in a nonprofit arena as well, that they understand the duties of the person they're succeeding. There's nothing worse, and I've seen this a lot, there's nothing worse than a pastor leaving and having an assistant pastor only by title who does not understand the dynamics of their job. That is the worst thing, because what happens is you see the demise of an organization or demise of a ministry. I've seen it just recently. There was a very close pastor to me. She had an assistant pastor, but it was only in title. So when she unfortunately passed away, the assistant pastor was not able to step up and assume the pastorship title because they had never practiced being the pastor. In essence, that's what delegation does. It not only gives the leader a break, but it also gives the person that's being delegated the responsibility the opportunity to practice the responsibilities of their predecessor or their successor. So it is definitely vital. It is definitely important. And it also helps the organization make that transition so that when the pastor steps off the scene, you say, hey, we do the ceremony, you place them into that position. The congregation learns to adjust to that particular successor's leadership abilities and leadership style. And by the time the pastor steps away, they're already getting prepared. Now, I know what a lot of people are saying, and a lot of people go, well, if I do that, and I hear this all the time, if I do that, are they still going to respect me? Yes, because they will understand that there are two different styles of leadership. Most of the time you find an assistant pastor who has their own style of leadership, or they have to find their own style of leadership to adjust to the people. Or the people likewise, the people have to adjust to the style, the leadership style of the assistant pastor. Well, if they get the opportunity to practice it before the pastor leaves, it's a smooth transition. There's nothing worse than a pastor leaving or, unfortunately meeting their demise, and the congregation is kind of thrown into the assistant pastor stepping up when they've never made that connection with them. So then you have all this extra unnecessary turbulence, which could have easily been avoided had there been a proper delegation to the assistant pastor to prepare them for the departure of the pastor. So I just wanted to reiterate that because it's very important. Now, today's show, we're going to be talking about a concept that people may hear but don't really understand, and that's called emotional intelligence. And the name kind of gives you a semblance of what it means, understanding your emotions. Why is that important? Because your emotions will be all over the place when you're in a position of leadership. And depending on your particular leadership style, be it transformational, transactional, or situational, emotions will play a very major part in how you lead. So I love to give definitions. So for emotional intelligence, it is the ability to perceive emotion, integrate emotion to facilitate thought, understand emotions, and to regulate emotions to promote promotional growth. All right? So again, when you're dealing with emotional intelligence, it's the ideology that you understand your emotions. And I'll use the example when we talk about situational leadership. that implies that every situation you're able to adapt to that particular situation. Well, just in that ideology alone, there's a bunch of emotions that will come into play. Because let's say that you're dealing with the demise of a pastor, and now you're the assistant pastor, and you're having to step up with a congregation that you're used to working with, but not actually leading. There are a lot of emotions that's going to come with that. Because for one, you're going to have to deal with the fact that they don't really know your leadership style. So you're going to constantly hear, well, pastor didn't do it that way, or we never did it this way. You're going to have to understand that that's what they're accustomed to, and you're going to have to transition them into that. So you can't get frustrated in a situation like that because you were never properly delegated to, so they never got to adjust to your leadership style. So now you have to be more patient with the congregation, and you have to understand that they're accustomed to one particular style of leadership that may or may not be your style of leadership. So that's going to require a whole nother level of patience. Reciprocally, let's say that you are prepared and you've been delegating and you've been delegated to, so that when the pastor leaves the scene, you're able to step up into that position, but there's still going to be a certain level of patience, there's still going to be a certain level of sternity and assertiveness that you may have to have because they're not accustomed to you. In this scenario, they're used to working with you, but they're not accustomed to your leadership style solely. So now they're not going between you and pastor, it's just you. So you have to understand, when do you need to be assertive? When do you need to be patient? When do you need to take a firm hand? These are all emotions that leaders have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So it becomes vital that you understand how to deal with your emotions. So there are a couple of things that you want to implement. Number one, perceiving emotions. The ability to detect and decipher emotions in people's faces, in their voices, in their cultural artifacts, including the ability to identify your own emotions. So not only do you have to be in control of your emotions, you have to be able to diffuse and infuse your organizational members' emotions as well. Because everybody's going to have emotions going at any given moment. And you as the leader, you have to be able to make sure that you can stabilize in any given situation everybody's emotions, including your own, which is a task in itself. So perceiving emotions is very important, and you want to keep that in mind when making decisions or when working with the people in your organizations or your churches. Okay, so on a break, the question was asked about examples of delegation, particularly in the church setting. So I'm going to double back real quick to get into delegation really quickly. So when I use the example of a pastor and assistant pastor, let's think about what the term assistant means. It means to assist an individual. So for example, with your assistant pastors, your pastor typically handles most of the pastoring. They're supposed to be, in essence, the CEO of an organization. That's supposed to be kind of the equivalent to a pastor. The ideology is kind of the same, that you're over all the operations of your ministry. So your assistant pastor would be considered the VP of your organization. So they would do kind of what a VP would do. Yes, they probably should minister at least once a month, because when it comes to deciphering and distributing the Word of God, everybody does it differently. But you want to make sure that the people are in a place of being receptive to their style of preaching. Well, I'll use preaching very loosely, but their style of administering. Because remember, not everybody preaches, and in most churches, I'm apostolic, so we get into the hooping and the hollering, what we call it. But then you have other preachers that are word preachers. So a lot of times it becomes beneficial to let them minister because you can decipher what kind of preaching style they have. So let's say that your pastor is more of a hooping and hollering, and he's got the emotional intelligence going, and everybody's excited. Reciprocally, your assistant pastor might actually want your assistant pastor to be a word minister, meaning they stand flat-foot, they're a teacher, they're administering the word. In that scenario, it's a very good pairing because the pastor may get the emotions going, but your assistant pastor gets the word flowing, and people are really able to grapple it. And remember, with your organization or your ministry, people will receive the word in different manners. You will find people that love a good hoop and a good holler, and they love the music going and emotions are going. And then you may find reciprocally that people may respond better to a word minister, meaning they prefer that there's little hooping and hollering and you're standing flat foot and you're really breaking down the Word of God on a Sunday morning. So it becomes beneficial to let the assistant pastor minister once a month or maybe twice a month, depending on the situation. And remember, preparation is key. So if you know that, let's say you have an apostle, and you understand the apostle has intentions of promoting the pastor to being over a section or a region of the organization, knowing that you want to create a plan to prepare the organization for that movement. So in that same scenario, let's say that you sat down with the apostle, and the apostle sits down with the pastor and the assistant pastor, and he says, hey, in 2 months, I'm going to start a new church, and I want to send your pastor to pastor this new church. Well, you know you're dealing with a 2-month scale. So what do you want to do in that 2 months? In that 2 months, you want to get the people prepared for the departure of the pastor. So you want to let the assistant pastor start preaching more. So instead of preaching once a month now, they preach twice a month. Instead of the pastor doing a lot of the officiating, weddings, funerals, things of that nature, you want to look at the calendar and say, okay, we have 4 weddings that I'm officiating. I'm only going to do 2 of those weddings. You're going to do the other 2, but I'll be with you to show you how to officiate. It's sort of that Elisha and Elijah scenario. In the Bible, you see where Elisha was everywhere with Elijah, especially when Elijah knew he was getting ready to be raptured. He made sure Elijah was with him. He saw him prophesy. He saw him do officiating things. It's the same ideology. So in that 2-month span, you want to kick up the delegation of the assistant pastor to prepare them for the departure of the pastor. Same ideology. They operate in a VP capacity. Everything I can do, you should be able to do. Now, the manner by which you do it may be different, but you should be able to do everything that I do as it pertains to interacting with the congregation and the executives and the executive board of this ministry or this organization. So that's just to give you some tidbits. So always think about it. Your assistant pastor's job is to assist and to understand all the dynamics of your job being the pastor. And same thing for an apostle. If you're going to have pastors, especially for an apostle, apostles should have pastors. Every pastor should have a delegation of what they do in the organization. So you may have one pastor that is a VP, meaning they understand everything that the apostle does. You may have one pastor that's the treasurer. Their job is to make sure they understand the money aspects of the whole organization. Another one may be the executive of the movement. Their job is to make sure, or protocol. Protocol is a good one. You may have a VP of protocol. What is their job? That's actually a very good one. Their job is protocol, to make sure that there are systems and procedures set in place and that those systems and procedures are followed at every turn and every movement. So that's actually a very good one. That's VP of protocol. That was free. I threw that out there. All right, so back to emotional intelligence. So the second one is using your emotions, or the ability to harness emotions to facilitate various cognitive activities such as thinking and problem solving. The emotionally intelligent person can capitalize fully upon his or her changing moods in order to best fit the task at hand. A good example again is situational leadership. The ability to shift in and out of emotions as needed. Case in point. Let's say you get to the organization and there's an all-out brawl because Sister Shelley did not count the money right. So now the trustees are all in an uproar because they don't understand what's going on. So you pull up to the organization, you walk through the doors, and everybody's just going at it. In that scenario, you have to check your emotions because for many people, myself included, my first shift is to raise my voice. Well, maybe that's not needed in that particular scenario. Maybe your presence coming into the room will quiet everybody down because they know, oh God, Bishop just walked in. We need to chill out. If that happens, then you don't need to raise your voice. You need to shift into understanding and listening. So you want to take a step back, and somebody's going to take the lead and say, oh, well, you know, this Bishop, this is what's going on and such and such. You want to shift out of being annoyed and angry and shift into, I need to listen and take in what they're saying to me so I can decipher what is going on and start to make sense of the mess that apparently has transpired in my absence. Reciprocally, you may walk into a situation where they're supposed to be having a conference meeting and everybody's sitting around spinning chairs. So you walk in, and in that instance, you need to shift into being assertive and ask everybody, why are you spinning chairs and sitting around when you have been here for 2 hours and have achieved nothing? Whole different set of emotions. So you got to be able to understand where you lie, where your strength lies in your particular emotions, and be able to shift in and out of your emotions to get the job done. So as you can see, there's a whole mindset that goes along with emotional intelligence, because it's a strong awareness of being able to understand your strengths and weaknesses as it pertains to your emotions. Now, this is where you do get into differences between female leadership and male leadership. Females typically do operate with a high level of emotion. The opposite can be said about men. oftentimes we're trained and taught to operate with a lower level of emotional intelligence because that's just, as humans, we just have that distinction. So I spend a lot more time going over this with my female comrades because they do struggle a lot more with emotions because that's just their nature as females. With males, I struggle with them, getting them to understand the dynamics of not every situation requires you to be assertive. You can be assertive and not aggressive, which a lot of times is the issue with a lot of male leadership. They can be aggressive and it's not necessary for them to assert their authority. So you have to be mindful of that as well. All right, the next one, understanding your emotions. The ability to comprehend emotion language and appreciate complicated relationships among emotions. For example, understanding emotions encompasses the ability to be sensitive to slight variations between emotions and the ability to recognize and describe how emotions evolve over time. Of course, this is a whole class. I'm trying to shorten it for everything. But again, being aware of your emotions, and not just your emotions, being aware of the people around you, particularly your leadership team. I have 3 different teams. So I have a TV team, a radio team, and a magazine team. Each team has a lead, except the magazine is just starting. But each team has a lead. So I know that Nicole operates one way, whereas Simone operates in a completely different manner. So I'm mindful of that. So the delivery that I deliver when I'm talking to Nicole is not the same delivery I deliver when I'm talking to Simone because they have 2 different distinctive styles. Then I also have a male on one of my other teams. So the way that I deliver to Kevin is not the same manner that I deliver to Simone or that I deliver to Nikki. Whole different ball games, but you have to understand that as well. So be mindful of emotions, not just yours, but your organization members as well. Okay, so we talked about perceiving, using, understanding. Lastly is managing your emotions, or the ability to regulate emotions in both ourselves and in others. Therefore, the emotionally intelligent person can harness emotions, even negative ones, and manage to achieve intended goals. All right, so the name kind of implies what it is. You have to get to a place where you can manage, which remember, leadership and management go hand in hand. Leaders are the people that typically lead, and the people, managers, are the ones that typically manage. It's almost that simple. So you have your leaders and you have your managers, which in our arena, which in the nonprofit arena, you would have your leaders and your assistant pastors, or you start getting into VP type titles, but they all kind of mean the same thing. There's managers and then there's your leader. So you definitely, as a leader, want to be able to manage emotions, and those emotions are not just yours. Let me stress that. Those emotions are not just yours. So when you get into a high pressure situation, not only are your emotions going to be flying, but your organizational members' emotions are going to be flying as well. As a leader, you have to learn how to defuse and to infuse situations. What is the difference? To defuse a situation means to walk into something where people emotions are just flailing all over the place, and people are just, they're talking at high volumes and nobody's listening and they're kind of going at it. Typically, everybody's being overly aggressive. So in that situation, you have to be able to diffuse a situation. And that's done in a number of different ways. Sometimes people's presence, I have learned that I have one of those presences that when I walk in the room, people tend, especially people that I'm leading, tend to kind of decelerate when I walk in. For others, it's not that simple. Sometimes you may have to raise your voice, or you may have to, start a countdown. It all depends. But that comes with understanding the dynamics of the people that are on your leadership team, which is even more vital. And when we were leaving, I used the example of my 3 leads, Nikki, Simone, and Kevin. Each one of them has a different personality. Each one of them's intake is different. Like I said, there are certain things I can say to one I cannot say to the other ones, and then there are certain things I can say to one I can't say to the other 2, especially with the dynamics being 2 females and a male. That dynamic is very murky because there are certain things I will say to Kevin, and there's a certain manner in which I will deliver things to Kevin I would not dare say to Nikki or Simone, and then reciprocally, there's a manner that I would say to Simone and Nikki I would never say to Kevin. So it's about understanding the dynamics of your leadership, which is vitally important because it plays a part in the way you delegate tasks. There are certain tasks, because using the same example, there's me and then there's those 3 and then there's the organization itself. Each one of those 3 are delegated specific tasks. When I delegate those tasks, I am mindful of emotional intelligence is 1, and their delivery of their emotions is 2. So for instance, there are certain situations I would never put Nikki in because she can be aggressive, but by nature, she's more passive. But she can get aggressive if she needs to be. Reciprocally, Simone has a higher level of emotional intelligence, so she's very conscious of her emotions, and she doesn't really use them very often. So if it came to a situation that required empathy, I'm not going to ask Simone to do it because she's very cut off. She's going to say what she has to say, she's walking away. When it comes to assertive situations, naturally, I will put Kevin in them because he operates with a very lower level of emotional intelligence, meaning he's aware of his emotions, but he knows how to shift between them very easily. So when it comes to being assertive, if it's something that really has to get done and it has to get done really fast, I'm going to put Kevin in charge of it because he can operate that fast. But it takes me having an understanding of what the 3 of them can do, because when I delegate to them, when their execution of it is going to be a mindful thought process of how they deal with their emotions. Sounds very complicated, but it's really not. Most of the time you do it anyway, you're just not conscious of it. Most pastors understand the people on their teams. They're just not mindful of it because it comes naturally. When you work with the individual, you naturally learn that individual. It's just human nature. So when you work with somebody, even if you're in a cubicle, which I'm seeing a lot more, even if you're in a cubicle, you tend to rear your head around it and you talk to the person that's next to you, or y'all go to lunch together. And by you guys spending that much time together, you get a better understanding of who they are as an individual. And that becomes tricky as well. So let me make a sidebar really quickly. Leaders want to be mindful of how much time they spend with their teams, and that comes with people understanding, again, emotions and the way people think and the way they process. Because what I find a lot is leaders go, well, I don't want to get close to my leadership team because I don't want them to get familiar. Okay, well, that goes also with the dynamics of the team and how they operate. Case in point, I had a leader one time, she had that struggle. Before she got me, she really wouldn't get close to people. She was like, I don't want them to get familiar with me. And we had a conversation, And I let her know, as my leader, it doesn't matter what you say to me. That's not going to change the way I view you. You're not a friend. You're more of an associate. So I keep that in mind when we're doing business. Now, if we go to a restaurant and we eat or whatever the case be, then I'm okay with dropping the guards and us laughing and kikiing and, having kicks and giggles. But when we're in a business environment, I don't look at you any differently. So it doesn't matter what you say to me. That's not going to change the dynamic of leader and manager. That's just how it is. And sometimes you have to have those conversations because some people like myself, there is a certain level of trust we expect. And if we don't get it, we're instantly turned off and we'll go find some other place to work. That's just what we require. Then there are others who don't want to know anything about you. They don't want to know anything about what you do. I'm here to do a job. I'm going to do that job. I'm going home. It requires you having a conversation about it to get an understanding of what their needs are so that you can meet those needs and they get an understanding of what your needs are and they can meet your needs. That way, thusly creating a high level of fiduciary trust that everybody understands what their role is in the organization and everybody understands what's expected of them. Because at the end of the day, that's what all of this is about. Emotional intelligence, understanding the dynamics of everybody, all this correlates to understanding what's required of you and you understanding what you need, what is needed from me to you. So emotional intelligence helps make a play in for all of that because that's the end goal. How do I become the best leader that I can be? And do I understand what my job title entails so that when I get promoted and when you leave the scene, I'm ready to step into it, thus making the transition a lot smoother so that we can continue to be great as an organization. That's what all this is about. Emotional intelligence, leadership abilities, leadership styles, all correlates to us being the best organization that we can be so that we can maximize everybody's talents and skill set to make us the best organization and to make us as progressive as we need to be. So that's what this is all about. So a recap really quickly. 1, you want to perceive emotions. Understanding the dynamics of everybody on your leadership team. What are their facial expressions? What are their body language? You want to be able to perceive all of that to understand whenever you have meetings or whatever the case may be, where everybody stands because everybody's not verbal. Sometimes you do have to understand how somebody's body language tells you what they're doing or what somebody's facial expression tells you how they feel. Number 2, using those emotions. Once you understand all these dynamics, you're able to utilize them to get the organization to where it needs to be. Number 3, understanding those emotions, that when I see that facial expressions, maybe I need to shift what I'm saying. Or when I see that body language, maybe I need to understand what that means. And lastly, being able to manage all of those things. Being able to manage a room full of people when you know everybody's facial expressions or you know everybody's body language. How do you manage all of that to make sure that the organization as a whole is being able to move to its best self? So again, emotional intelligence, understanding the dynamics of emotions to make you a better leader and to make your parishioners understand your dynamics a lot better.